The night my brother's fiancée hammered on my door, I had grease under my nails, a cold engine block in pieces on my workbench, and absolutely no idea that by sunrise I'd be a married man. It was 12 minutes past midnight. Fog had rolled in off the lake so thick I couldn't see the end of my own dock, and the foghorn out on the point kept moaning every 30 seconds, like the whole world was grieving along with me. I was still up because I hadn't slept right in 8 months, not since we buried Daniel. When the knocking started, it wasn't the polite kind. It was the kind that makes your stomach drop before your brain catches up. Out here, nobody comes to a boatyard at midnight unless a hull's gone under or somebody's dead. And the only person I'd already lost. I wiped my hands on a rag and opened the door, and there she was, Wren. For a second, I almost didn't know her. Her hair was soaked flat to her face, her coat dripping a dark stain onto my porch boards, and she had a little girl asleep on her shoulder, bundled in a blanket that was too thin for the weather. In her free hand, she gripped a manila envelope so tight the corner had crumpled. She looked like someone who had run out of every other door in the world and arrived at the last one. "Theo," she said, and my name broke in half coming out of her. I looked past her into the fog. "Where's your car?" "Down by the gate. It wouldn't start the rest of the way up the hill." She swallowed. I didn't know where else to go. That woke me up faster than any amount of coffee. I stepped back and pulled the door wide. "Get inside, both of you." Now, she came in carrying my niece like the child was made of glass, and she stood in the middle of my little front room, shivering so hard the envelope rattled in her grip. The girl, Nina, 3 years old, Daniel's eyes exactly, stirred but didn't wake. I grabbed the wool throw off the back of the couch and draped it over the both of them before I even thought about it. "What happened?" I asked. Wren didn't sit. She just looked at me with those red-rimmed eyes and said the sentence that turned my whole life sideways. "I need you to marry me before sunrise. I want you to understand who I was before that night because it matters. My name's Theo Marsh. I run a boat repair yard on the north shore of a long, cold lake in a town small enough that the grocery store still writes your total on a paper pad. My father built the yard. My brother Daniel was supposed to inherit half of it, except Daniel never wanted grease on his hands. Daniel wanted the world. He was the charming one, the one who could walk into a room and own it by the time the doors swung shut. I was the one who stayed, the one who fixed things, the one nobody noticed unless something was broken. 8 months before that midnight knock, Daniel went out on the water in early spring when the lake was still half ice, chasing one of his big ideas, and the water won. They found his boat. It took them 4 days to find him. I was the one who identified what was left. I've never told anybody that part, and I'm only telling you now because you should know that grief had hollowed me out like a rotted log. I looked solid from the outside. Inside there was nothing holding me up. Wren had been at the funeral, of course, pale, silent, holding a baby that was barely walking yet. Daniel had met her 2 years earlier, fallen hard the way he fell at everything, and they'd had Nina before they ever got around to a wedding. They were engaged. The wedding was set for that summer. He died in the spring. So Wren wasn't my sister-in-law. Legally, she was nobody to me at all. Just a grieving young woman tied to my family by a baby and a promise nobody got to keep. I'd seen her maybe twice since the funeral. We didn't know each other, not really. Which is why, standing in my front room at midnight, the word marry hung in the air between us like something neither of us could touch. "Sit down first," I said. "I can't, Theo. There's no time." That stopped me. I pointed at the kitchen chair anyway, and something in my voice must have landed, because she finally lowered Nina onto the couch, tucked the blanket around her, and sat at my table with her spine straight as a fence post. I put the kettle on because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. She opened the envelope and laid the papers out across my table. Legal pages, a county seal, a line at the top in bold print that I read 3 times before it made sense. Petition for emergency guardianship. "It's your father," she said. The kettle ticked behind me. My whole body went cold. I hadn't spoken to my father in 6 years, Gerald Marsh. He left when Daniel and I were teenagers. Left my mother, left the yard, left town, and built himself a fortune in real estate 2 states over, the kind of man who measured love in leverage. He didn't come to my mother's funeral. He came to Daniel's, though. Sat in the back in a $5,000 coat and didn't shed a tear. and left before they lowered the casket. I'd assumed I'd never have to see him again. He filed this afternoon, Wren said, her voice flat and fast, like she was reciting it to keep from falling apart. There's a hearing at 8 in the morning. He's claiming I'm unfit, that I'm too young, that I have no income, that I'm grieving too hard to take care of her, that I've got no family standing behind me. She pressed her lips together. He wants Nina, Theo. He wants to take her and raise her as his, the only piece of Daniel left, and he wants to lock her away in that mausoleum he calls it a house and turn her into another Marsh trophy. He can't just take her. He has money. He has lawyers. He has a judge who plays golf with his attorney. She let out a sound that wasn't a laugh. And I have a duffel bag and a car that won't make it up your hill. I sat down across from her. Where does marrying me come into this? She slid one of the pages toward me with a shaking finger. My lawyer's a legal aid attorney, half my age, working 3 cases at once. But she told me the truth. She said the judge is going to look at 2 things tomorrow. A grandfather with a stable home, deep pockets, blood ties against a single mother, no job, no support system, who he's painting as falling apart. Wren looked up at me, and she said the one thing that flips it. If Nina's blood uncle, a Marsh, a homeowner, a business owner, someone steady, steps forward and stands with me, if there are 2 of us, a married household, family on my side instead of my father-in-law's side, her voice dropped. She said if you and I walked into that courtroom as husband and wife, with a home and an income, and Daniel's own brother choosing this child over his own father, the whole picture changes. The clerk opens the marriage office at 6. There's a justice who'll do it before the hearing. Before sunrise, the kettle started screaming. I got up and turned it off. I poured 2 mugs of tea neither of us had asked for, mostly so I'd have a reason to keep my back turned for a second. When I faced her again, I said the only honest thing in me. You barely know me. I know you fixed Daniel's truck every time he broke it and never once told him he was an idiot for breaking it. Her chin trembled. I know you carried his casket. I know you're the only person in this family who didn't come at me with a contract or a condition. I know you're the only safe door left. She put her hand flat on the papers. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm using you. I need something only you can give, and I have nothing to trade for it but the truth. So that's what I'm giving you. The truth. That answer hit me harder than any pretty speech would have, because Daniel had been all pretty speeches, and they'd never once been true. This woman was sitting at my brother's kitchen table asking the most outrageous thing one person can ask another, and she refused to dress it up. I looked over at the couch, where Nina had rolled toward the cushion, one small fist curled under her chin, breathing the deep way only children breathe. She had Daniel's nose. She had Daniel's stubborn cowlick. She was the last living thing my brother ever made, and a man I despised was coming to take her at 8 in the morning. I rubbed both hands down my face. If I do this, I said slowly, there's a rule. Wren sat up. No lying, not between us. Out there, in front of the judge, in front of the town, we do whatever has to be done. But in this house, at this table, we don't pretend. You don't act like this is love, and I don't act like I'm some hero who rode in to save you. We both know exactly what it is. She nodded fast, then slower, like she wanted me to see she meant it. Okay, and if it gets ugly, and it will, because you don't know my father, you don't keep things from me. We deal with it together or not at all. I won't keep anything from you. She wrapped her cold hands around the mug I'd given her. Theo, thank you. I just nodded, because I didn't trust my own voice, and I went to find the deed to my house so I'd have it for the clerk. We were married at 6:42 in the morning in a county office that smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax, by a justice of the peace named Hollis, who'd clearly been pulled out of bed and didn't ask a single question. There were no flowers, no rings. We didn't have time, and I told Hollis we'd lost them in the move, which he wrote down like it happened all the time. Wren wore the same coat from the night before, dried stiff. I wore my one collared shirt with a grease ghost on the cuff that no amount of scrubbing ever got out. Nina sat on a plastic chair eating dry cereal from a baggie, swinging her feet, completely unbothered that her family was being rebuilt around her. When Hollis said the words, Wren's hand was ice in mine. Mine was rough and shaking, which surprised me. We signed where we were told to sign, and when it was done, Wren looked at the certificate like it might dissolve, and I looked at her and said, Now we go keep your daughter." She nodded, but her eyes were on me, not the paper. And that was the first moment I understood this wasn't going to stay simple. The hearing nearly broke me before it started, because the second we walked into that courtroom, I saw my father for the first time in 6 years. Gerald Marsh, in a charcoal suit, silver hair, the same cold half smile he wore at funerals and closings. He had 2 attorneys. He looked at me, and I watched the math run behind his eyes. "What is Theo doing here?" And then he saw Wren's hand find mine, saw the certificate her lawyer slid across to the clerk, and the smile flickered. His lead attorney stood and called the whole thing a stunt, said Wren had factured a marriage overnight to a relative to game the proceeding. Said it proved she was unstable, desperate, willing to do anything. Wren's young lawyer stood up with her chin high and laid it out plain. Theo Marsh was the child's blood uncle. He owned his home and his business outright. He had no record, no debts in collection, no reason on earth to take on a wife and a 3-year-old, except that he loved his late brother and wanted his brother's daughter raised by people who knew her name before they knew her trust fund. She put me on the stand. I'm not a talker. Daniel was the talker. But the judge asked me one question. "Mr. Marsh, why are you doing this?" And I found I didn't have to think about the answer at all. "Because my brother is dead," I said. "And the only thing of his I've got left is a little girl who has his nose. And the man trying to take her is the same man who walked out on us when we were kids and didn't shed a tear when we buried Daniel. I don't want his money. I've got my own life and it's small and it's mine. I just don't want Nina growing up the way I grew up, looking across the dinner table at a man who sees her as an asset." I looked right at my father when I said it. "She's not an asset, she's a kid. And she's staying with her mother, with us." The courtroom was very quiet. My father's jaw worked, but no words came out. The judge took 20 minutes. When she came back, she denied the emergency petition. She found Wren a fit parent, noted the now married, stable 2-adult household, and ordered that Nina remain in her mother's custody. She told Gerald Marsh he was welcome to petition for supervised visitation through the proper channels if he wished to be in his granddaughter's life. The way she said "if he wished" made it clear she'd already taken his measure. My father stood, buttoned his coat, and walked past me close enough that I could smell his cologne. "You think this is over," he said, low, "just for me. You married a stranger to spite me. You've got no idea what you just signed up for." "You're right," I said. "I've got no idea. But I know it's better than being your son." He left, and in the parking lot, Wren stood with Nina on her hip and looked at me like she didn't know whether to laugh or be sick. "We did it," she said. "We bought a round," I said. "He doesn't quit. He's never quit anything in his life." She nodded. But for 1 second, watching the fog burn off the lake, she let herself smile. And I made the mistake of noticing how it changed her whole face. Wren and Nina moved into my house that afternoon with 2 duffel bags, a box of toys, and a car seat I had to figure out how to install 3 times. I gave them the back bedroom, my mother's old room, with the quilt she'd made still folded at the foot of the bed. Wren stood in the doorway holding Nina's hand, waiting for me to say something normal. I didn't have anything normal. Bathrooms across the hall. "The window sticks. I'll plane it down this week." "Thank you," she said. "You don't have to thank me every time I point at a room." That almost made her smile. Not quite. The first days were strange in a way I don't have good words for. We moved around each other like 2 people sharing a kayak, careful not to tip it. She kept asking if she could use things. The stove, the washer, the good knife. And I kept telling her she lived here now, and then feeling odd every single time I said it. At night, she put Nina to bed in the back room and closed the door soft, and I lay in mine listening to the house make its small noises, and the foghorn out on the point. And I thought about how 8 months ago I'd been the only living person inside these walls. By the 3rd day, the whole town knew. That's how small towns work. You can buy a quart of oil at 7 in the morning, and by noon somebody's cousin knows you remarried. At the marina, old Pete, who runs the bait counter, looked at Wren, looked at the certificate-shaped absence of a ring on my hand, and raised one eyebrow. "That was quick," he said. Wren went red. I set my parts order on the counter. "Need 2 of those impellers, Pete." He rang them up, but he gave me a look that said the conversation wasn't over, just postponed. Outside loading the truck, Wren stood with her arms crossed. Everybody thinks I'm ridiculous, she said. Everybody's curious, different thing. Feels the same. It isn't. She didn't look convinced. But she got in the truck, and on the drive home, Nina sang a song with no words from her car seat. And Ren turned around to look at her, and the hard line of her shoulders softened just a little. My father waited 8 days before his next move, which told me he'd been thinking. That worried me more than if he'd come back swinging. I was under a sailboat in the yard, replacing a through-hole fitting, when a black car I didn't recognize crawled up my hill. Not my father. A man in a pressed suit with shiny shoes that had never touched a dock. He handed me a card. He represented a development group. They were interested in the North Shore parcel. They'd pay above market for my yard, the land, all of it. Cash, quick close. I knew exactly whose money it was. My father couldn't take the child, so he'd take the leverage, buy the ground out from under me, leave Ren married to a man with no home and no business, and then file again and tell the judge the stable household had collapsed. Not for sale, I said, and went back under the boat. The man left a folder on my workbench anyway. The number on the top page was more money than I'd see in 15 years of fixing other people's engines. That night I sat at my kitchen table looking at it, and Ren came in from putting Nina down and saw my face. "What is it?" she asked. I told her. I'd promised no lies, so I told her all of it, the offer, who was behind it, what it would do to the case if I took it. She sat down across from me and looked at that number for a long time. "You should take it," she said quietly. I blinked. "Theo, that's your whole life made easy. You'd never have to crawl under a boat in November again, and you'd be free of all this. Of us." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "I came to your door and asked you to ruin your life for a woman you don't even know, and a kid that isn't yours. If that money's the way out, you should take it, and I'll figure out the rest." I always figure out the rest. I looked at her. "Is that what you want?" "It doesn't matter what I want. It does to me." I pushed the folder across the table and off the edge into the trash can, and the sound it made, hitting the bottom, was the most satisfying thing I'd heard in months. I don't take money to do what my father wants. Never have. Not going to start the week I married into spiting him. She stared at the trash can, then she put her face in her hands, and her shoulders shook once, and I realized she was laughing and crying at the same time, the exhausted kind, the kind that comes out when somebody finally does the thing you stopped expecting people to do. "You're an idiot," she said into her hands. "Runs in the family," I said. She looked up. "Daniel would have taken it." "Yeah," I said, "he would have. And then felt bad about it for a week and bought you flowers." She laughed for real then, wet and surprised. "He did do that, and for the first time, we talked about him. Not in the careful, around-the-edges way we'd been doing it, really talked. She told me about how he proposed in a thunderstorm because he couldn't wait for the rain to stop, how he was late to Nina's birth because he was buying the wrong size of car seat in a panic, how the last thing he said to her before he went out on the water was back by dinner. I told her about us as kids, the good parts, before our father left and Daniel learned to charm his way out of every room he was ever uncomfortable in. We sat at that table until 2 a.m, and somewhere in there, the kayak stopped feeling like it might tip. Things changed after that, not loudly. Ren stopped asking before she used the kitchen. She started running the office side of the yard, the invoices, the parts orders, the customers, who'd been stringing me along for payment since spring. Turned out she'd done bookkeeping before Nina. Within 2 weeks, she'd collected 3 overdue accounts I'd written off. She put a sticky note on my workbench that said, "Call Hargrove. He owes us $900. Don't let him sweet-talk you." And when Hargrove came in to sweet-talk me, she walked out of the office, set the invoice on her counter and said, "$900 today, or we keep your boat until spring." Hargrove paid. She got a sunburn across her nose, helping me haul a hull. She tore her jacket on a cleat and kept working. Nina started calling the yard the boat place and demanded to wear a tiny life vest everywhere, even at dinner. One morning, Pete asked Ren a parts question before he asked me, and in the truck afterward she whispered, "Did you hear that?" He asked me, and looked out the window at the lake like she was trying not to make too much of it. I made too much of all of it. I won't pretend I didn't. I started looking forward to the kitchen light being on when I came up from the yard. I started saving the good stories from my day to tell her. I learned she tapped her thumb against her coffee mug twice when she was nervous about a phone call, and that she hummed Daniel's no-words song to Nina at bedtime without realizing she was doing it. We still had separate rooms. We still had the rule. On paper, the marriage had a purpose and a deadline, until the custody fight is over and Nina's safe. But by the end of that month, I knew how she took her coffee, and she knew I went quiet when I was worried about money. And none of that felt like paperwork. It felt like the start of something I hadn't planned for and had no right to want. Quick question while we're here. If a stranger showed up at your door at midnight, asking for the most impossible favor of your life, would you have opened the door? Tell me in the comments, because the next part is where opening it nearly cost Theo everything. My father's last move came on a grey afternoon when the wind was up and the lake had teeth. He hired a private investigator. I found out because Ren found out. A man in a parked car at the bottom of the hill, photographing the house, the yard us. He'd been there 2 days. My father's new strategy was simple and vicious. Prove the marriage was a sham. If he could show a judge that Ren and I lived like strangers, separate rooms, no relationship, a marriage that existed only on paper to beat his petition, he could argue fraud on the court, get the custody case reopened, and paint Ren as a manipulator who'd weaponize a child to win. The photos would show exactly that, because it was exactly that. 2 people, 2 bedrooms, a marriage of pure necessity. We'd been honest with each other, and that honesty was about to be used as a knife. Ren was shaking when she told me, holding her phone with the lawyer's text still on the screen. He's going to file again. He says he can prove it's fake. And, the thing is, Theo, her voice cracked, I dragged you into a lie, and now the lie is the thing that loses her. I should have panicked. Instead, I felt something go very still and clear in my chest, the way it does when an engine finally tells you what's actually wrong with it. Then we stopped lying, I said. She looked up. What? You came to my door and told me the truth because you said it was all you had. I set my coffee down, so let's tell the truth. Not the version he wants, the real one. I sat down across from her. Ren, I didn't marry you to spite my father. That's what I said in the courtroom, because it was the easiest true thing to say. But it's not the whole truth. I married you because I'd been dead inside for 8 months, and you knocked on my door at midnight, holding the only piece of my brother left in the world, and you needed somebody to be brave with you. And for the first time since they pulled Daniel out of that lake, I wanted to be the one who showed up. I made myself keep going, and somewhere in the last month, this stopped being paper for me. I don't know when. Maybe the sticky note about Hargrove. Maybe when you hummed his song and didn't know you were doing it. But it stopped. She'd gone completely still. So here's the truth your father can take to any judge he wants, I said. We started this as an arrangement, and it turned into something neither of us planned. That's not fraud. That's just what happens when 2 people end up in the same small boat in a storm. They start pulling the same direction. Her eyes filled. Theo, you don't have to say anything back. That's not why I said it. I stood up, because my own heart was hammering, and I didn't trust myself to sit there and watch her decide. I just needed you to know it before we walked into another courtroom. So that whatever we say in there, it's true. She caught my wrist before I could turn away. Her hand was warm. It's not just you, she said. So quiet I almost missed it under the wind. I've been telling myself it was gratitude. It's not gratitude. She let out a shaky breath. I notice when your truck comes up the hill. I save the good stories for you. I knew the rule and I kept breaking it in my head every single night. We stood there in my kitchen with the lake roaring outside and the investigator's car at the bottom of the hill, and for the first time since midnight at my door, neither of us was pretending anything. What happened next didn't feel like part of the arrangement. It didn't feel like a story we were performing for a judge or a town or my father. It was quiet and honest and ours. But honesty wasn't going to win a courtroom by itself. My father had photographs of 2 separate bedrooms and a marriage certificate dated the same morning as a custody hearing. On paper, he had a case, so we did the only thing we could. We made the truth louder than his version of it. We went on offence. Ren's lawyer subpoenaed my father's own records, and we found what people like Gerald Marsh always leave behind, a paper trail. The development offer for my yard, traced back to a shell company he controlled, proof he'd tried to financially destroy the household after the first hearing, which the judge could only read one way. That this wasn't a man worried about a child's welfare. This was a man who needed to win. We had Pete from the marina, and Hollis the justice of the peace, and Nina's paediatrician, and 3 customers, all willing to say the same thing under oath. That they'd watched a grieving man and a grieving woman build something real around a little girl, whatever the date on the paper said. And we had Nina herself, who, when my father's attorney's expert came to do a home evaluation, refused to leave Wren's side, then climbed into my lap uninvited, and fell asleep with her fist curled around my thumb the way she did with her mother. The evaluator wrote it all down. The second hearing was 3 weeks later. My father came in expecting to expose a fraud. His attorney played the photos, the timeline, the marriage of convenience. He made it sound exactly as cynical as it had started. Then Wren's lawyer stood up, and instead of denying any of it, she agreed with all of it. Yes, she said, this marriage began as an arrangement. My client knocked on a stranger's door at midnight, terrified with nowhere left to go, and asked her late fiancé's brother for help, and he gave it. She turned and looked at my father. What Mr. Marsh wants you to believe is that this makes it fake. But I'd asked the court to consider the alternative, that a young widow and a grieving uncle put a child's safety ahead of their own pride, their own comfort, their own caution, and that in doing the hard, frightening, selfless thing, they found something genuine. That's not fraud. That's the best of what people are capable of. She set down a folder. Now let's talk about the petitioner's shell company and the offer he made to buy the family's home out from under this child 8 days after losing his first petition. The room shifted. I watched it happen on the judge's face. When the judge spoke, she was looking at my father. She'd reviewed the home evaluations. She'd reviewed the financial records. She found, in language I'll remember for the rest of my life, that the household was stable, loving, and real in every way that matters to a child. She granted Wren permanent sole custody. She denied my father any further petitions absent a substantial change in circumstance, and she noted for the record that his conduct since the first hearing raised serious questions about his motivation. My father stood so fast his chair scraped. He looked at me, and for once there was nothing smooth in his face. "You'll regret this," he said. "Both of you. That child is a Marsh." Stood up before I could. She had Nina on her hip and that same straight spine she'd had at my kitchen table at midnight. "She is a Marsh," Wren said. "She's Daniel's, and Daniel chose me, and I choose them." She nodded toward me. "You never chose anybody but yourself, and you'll die surprised that it cost you everything. Goodbye, Gerald." He stared at her, waiting for her to shrink. She didn't. Then he grabbed his coat and walked out, his shiny shoes stepping around the puddles in the courthouse. Lot like the ground itself had offended him. He got in his black car and left without looking back, and we never heard from him again. We drove home with the windows cracked, and the lake spread out gold under a sky that had finally, after all those months, cleared. Nina was asleep in her car seat. Wren had her hand on the certificate in her lap, not the marriage one, the custody order. The one that said safe. "It's over," she said. "It's actually over. Looks that way." She was quiet for a mile. Then she said, "So you don't have to do this anymore." I knew what she meant. I waited. She turned to look at me. The whole reason for the marriage was to keep her. She's kept. The promise was made under pressure in the middle of the night by 2 people with no other choice. "If you want out, Theo, I'd understand. You did more for us than anybody had any right to ask. I won't hold you to a thing you signed at 6 a.m. to save a kid that isn't yours." A month ago, I would have known exactly what to say. I'd have said we made a deal, the deal's done, and gone back to my quiet house and my cold dinners and my workbench and my grief. But I thought about the sticky notes, the no-words song, Nina's fist around my thumb, Wren in the courtroom saying I choose them. I thought about how the kitchen light being on had become the best part of every single day. I pulled the truck over at the top of the hill, where you can see the whole yard and the dock and the lake all at once. "I didn't marry you because of the paper," I said, "and I'm not staying because the paper did its job." I looked at her. "I thought I was helping you save your daughter. I didn't realize I was getting a family. I lost everybody, Wren. My mother, then Daniel. I'd already decided I'd live the rest of my life alone in that house with the foghorn for company, and then you knocked. My voice went rough. Don't ask me to go back to before you knocked. Her eyes filled, but she was smiling. She reached across the seat and took my hand, and in the back seat Nina stirred and said, "Sleepy and certain, are we home?" Wren laughed, and a tear slipped down, and she said, "Yeah, baby, we're home." We sat there a minute, the three of us, at the top of the hill in the gold light, the lake calm at last and the yard waiting below, worn and imperfect and ours. Then I put the truck in gear and drove us down to the house, where the porch light was already on, like it had been waiting for us the whole time. I never did find Daniel's wedding ring, the one he'd bought for that summer that never came. But about a year later, sorting through a box of his things, Wren found it. She held it in her palm for a long time. Then she put it in a little dish on Nina's dresser, next to the life vest she still refused to take off. For when she's older, Wren said, so she knows her dad picked it out. I put my arm around her, and we stood in our daughter's doorway and watched her sleep with Daniel's nose and Daniel's cowlick, and a future that no one was ever going to take from her. It started with a knock at midnight and a sentence so impossible I almost said no. Thank God I opened the door.